and even facing a recent traumatic events. She will tell us how she has been dealing with everything. Get ready to be inspired and learn so much from this amazing speaker. Sandy, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm very honored to be with the group, and I hope that what I have to share helps a lot of people all over the world. Well, I'm going to talk about some personal experiences that I've had. I'm not a brain scientist. I am a survivor of trafficking, and I'm going to share some of not only my story of trafficking, but as was mentioned in the introduction, some of the experiences that I had of new trauma that has come up recently this year. When I was invited to share with Humans for Humans, the invitation blew me away, because at the beginning of this year, my husband and I started planning a trip to Norway. If you can believe that. I live in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado in the United States, and we were dreaming about a trip to Norway. And we started researching, we started putting things together, and dreaming about this trip to see the Northern Lights, to explore his homeland. He has Norwegian in his DNA, and we were going to go to Sweden. Well, everything changed in April of this year when we were hit by a truck. So I'm going to share some of that information with you, not only details of the wreck that we were involved in, but how it triggered trauma from over 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was a victim of trafficking. So I'm going to start with the wreck. We were having the perfect day. Now, this day that this photo was taken, this was the day after. This was with no sleep. This was what it looks like after I was hit by a truck. And it was a horrific experience. But it didn't start out that way. It started out as the perfect day. We have some property out in the mountains about an hour and a half from the city, and we call it our promised land. We had spent the day on the promised land with our German Shepherd, and we walked the property. The pine trees were starting to release their beautiful fragrance. The sky was blue. The birds were singing. It was the perfect day. And everything was just as it should be. We were driving home, and we were only less than a mile from our house, turning in an intersection. And all of a sudden, I was in another dimension. I felt like I was in the Matrix. I was spinning in slow motion, but at 100 miles an hour. I saw white, fluffy clouds like feathers surround me. And I heard a sound like broken glass or like a siren, like a trumpet. I smelled this really clean smell, and I felt Jesus come very near to me. And in this moment, I was in peace. I was at peace. I looked at my husband, and he was having a very different experience. He was frantic. He was saying, "We've been hit. We've been hit." And I didn't understand, because I was in this feathery white cloud, and I was experiencing something very different than he was experiencing. But I did start to realize that his hair was wild, his eyes were like fire, and he was screaming that we were hit because we had been hit by a truck. These white feathery clouds were airbags. The sound of breaking glass was the windshield busted. There was glass in my face. The siren was the horn that was blaring, and the smell was the smoke that was filling the cab of our truck. I said, "Get out, get out, get out. It's going to catch on fire." And my husband jumped out the driver's side door. I tried to jump out of my door, but it was broken and it wouldn't open because it had been crushed. And I had to climb over his seat. And when I got out, we got our dog out of the back seat, and I ran with Cosmo, our German Shepherd, up under the bridge, under the overpass. But my husband is a hero, and he ran towards the other truck. He wanted to check on that man, and even though he had slammed into us, he wanted to make sure he was okay. And I'll just tell you, thank God we were all okay. We all walked away from the wreck, but as you can see, the green truck on the left, this was the unlicensed driver who hit us. He ran a red light, and he slammed into us at a very high rate of speed. Our truck is on the other side, and We had a diesel Super Duty F-250 Ford pickup truck. We picked this vehicle so we could tow a 43-foot fifth wheel camper. It's a very strong, very heavy duty vehicle, and it was totaled in this wreck. This was an extremely traumatic experience, and it came out of nowhere. It triggered trauma from human trafficking that I have spent the last 20 years healing from. So I'm going to share a little bit of those details with you and about my story of trafficking. When I was a child, I experienced all 10 of the ACEs. If you're not familiar with the ACEs, these are Adverse Childhood Experience Scale that is used. It's public domain, so you can find it on the internet. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, the ACEs, list these experiences that a child might have that set them up for maybe disease or sickness or issues later in life. And I scored on all of them. I was born into poverty. There was neglect in my household. I'm from a very small community, and we didn't have a lot of resources. My mother dropped out of high school to marry my father, who was in the military, and there was a lot of abuse. There was domestic violence, drug addiction, alcoholism. Both of my parents had mental illness, and my father ended up taking his own life as a result of unmedicated and unmanaged schizophrenia. That left my mother a widow and me and my sister as orphans. We were very vulnerable. And if you learn nothing from my presentation, please let this stick with you. Traffickers seek out vulnerabilities so they can exploit them for their own financial gain. And that's exactly what happened to me. A hero came on the scene offering to take my mother far away from the watchful eyes of her family, but he promised to provide us new clothes, new cars, a new house, all the toys I could ever play with. And instead of wearing handmade dresses like the one you see in my kindergarten picture, I remember my grandma making that dress. She sewed the lace around the neck and on the ruffles. She put those little buttons that were shaped like hearts down the front of that dress. I felt so special, like a princess in that dress. And I didn't realize at the time we couldn't afford school clothes. That's the level of poverty that we were in. That's why my grandmother handmade us clothing. So this trafficker had a very easy time convincing my mother to run away with him to another city in another state. And he was not the hero he promised to be. He was an evil man, heavily connected with other pedophiles, men and women who want to hurt children. They daily abused me. They groomed me. They assaulted me. They created child sexual abuse materials. Some people still use the term child pornography, but I really want to encourage the language to use child sexual abuse materials. And that material is still available today to these bad people who are still hurting children. So every time they view those images or videos of me being abused as a child, even though it's been 40 years, I'm still victimized every time. Well, that life was too much for me to take. And when I turned 12 years old, I started running away. I was looking for a safe place. I couldn't find somewhere to hide away from the abuse. In this picture on the left, you see a baseball dugout for a little league baseball team. At 12 years old, when I had run away from home, this was less than a mile from my house, and it felt like a safe place for me. I would sleep in that baseball dugout and feel safe. But I went back there as an adult, and it was the least safe place that a child could sleep. I also went under this bridge. Now, this bridge was only a couple blocks from my house, and I would climb up on top of the underpass. There was a highway that went over, and I would use my backpack as a pillow and sleep under the bridge. I had to fight off other homeless people and people that were doing drugs. There were rats, there were bats. It was a dirty, scary place, and I was desperate. I didn't have a way to care for myself, so I would literally dig my food out of trash cans. I did whatever I could to get the drugs and the alcohol that I had been groomed with, that I had become addicted to. just to sleep, just to get through the day. I started shoplifting. I started participating in criminal activity and getting arrested. I would steal food from the little convenience store across the street from the bridge. And one time, the man who ran the store saw me trying to steal sandwiches or beer or cigarettes or candy, and he made me pay him by having access to my body. There were a lot of men who would pull up under that bridge when I was just 12 years old, and they would offer to help me, to give me a place to shower, a place to sleep, to buy me drugs or a Happy Meal at the McDonald's. But there was always a cost. They always wanted access to me. They didn't care that I was just a little girl. They didn't care that I was broken and desperate and sleeping under a bridge. It made me lose all my faith in humanity. And I won't go into the details now, but I will say things got much worse. I went back, in this picture of me standing on the left, that's 50 pounds ago. So I've lost a lot of weight since that day. But I went back as an adult, and I stood in that place, and I had that photo taken by my husband so I could remember what I have survived. And let me tell you, I'm a survivor. I have a happy marriage to my best friend. We've been married for over 2 decades, and I get to spend all of my time with him. I've learned how to establish healthy boundaries so I don't get victimized again in unsafe relationships. I'm empowered by choice. I see my mental health counselor on a weekly or biweekly basis. I practice holistic functional health. I have a great team of doctors. I eat healthy. I exercise. I'm addicted to snowboarding since we moved to the mountains. And I don't drink any alcohol. I'm very careful to use a filter every day to take every thought captive, especially the ones that want to haunt me from my past. And my faith is a very strong part of my life. So I take those thoughts captive and I give them to Jesus, and he always makes them obey. I have to brag on my husband for a minute. He's an incredible man, and he's my Hosea. If you haven't read the book of Hosea, I encourage you to find it and read it. I think you'll be encouraged, and I think you'll be surprised. That book has been a source of strength and hope in my life, and I go back to it throughout the year, and I love to read that story of Hosea. And my husband is just like Hosea. And I've been working in the field since 2009 to be a part of ending human trafficking. I've written 3 books about my experience, and I have another book in the works right now. I'm hoping to release it by January of 2025. I've been a speaker on small stages and large, on virtual events, and in front of big audiences. I have worked with fundraisers and conferences. I was a strategic advisor for a group of nonprofit leaders that included former CIA, NSA, FBI. Now, I know we're on an international stage here, so you might not know what all that alphabet soup means, but these are American spy organizations. I worked with a group of former spies to target human traffickers and train law enforcement and military to go after those human traffickers and hold them accountable for their crimes. I'm a certified coach. I have coached nonprofit teams and other survivors. I host a podcast called The Dry Bones Army. I'm an educator, and I'm passionate about protecting children. Now, I'm not reading this off to you and sharing this information to try to brag or to impress you, but I'm telling you, I was functioning at an extremely high level. I was very confident and very consistent in my healing and a high performer before the wreck happened. I believe in finding a higher perspective, and this photo was taken at the Continental Divide on top of the mountain range that I snowboarded all the way to the bottom on the 20th anniversary day of freedom from human trafficking. But not long after that day, this wreck happened. Now, I'm careful to use the proper language. This was a wreck. It was not an accident. Accidents happen when everyone's following the rules. And this man didn't have a license, and he ran a red light. He was speeding. He shouldn't have been on the road. He slammed into us and it changed everything. It was very triggering. Here I am under the bridge. I had scooped my dog out of the back seat and I ran up under the bridge as my husband ran towards the green truck. And I fell on my knees and I started crying out, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus." I knew my life had been threatened. I knew it was very, very close to ending my life. And this trauma triggered the unresolved trauma from trafficking from 2 decades before. I had physical injuries all over my body. I'm still dealing with physical injuries today, and it's been 7 months since the wreck. I woke up the next morning and I was bruised all over. It reminded me of the experiences that I had had being beaten by traffickers, having my teeth knocked out, waking up with bruises all over my body. Honestly, I still have some trouble sleeping. I go on the worst case scenario route in my mind in the middle of the night, and it's very difficult to go back to sleep if I wake up in the night. At first, I had no appetite. I couldn't eat. And the only things I wanted to eat were comfort foods, convenience foods. And I'm a very healthy eater. I usually like organic salads and things like that. But after the wreck, I couldn't get back into the regular eating that I had been used to. It was impossible to ride in a vehicle. I would have a visceral feeling of fear, and it felt like it would flood my whole body. And driving was out of the question for several months. I just started driving again last month. For years, I have had panic attacks, and I've been diagnosed with PNES, panic attacks. That stands for pseudo non-epileptic seizures. It doesn't mean pseudo because they're fake. It just means they happen in a different part of the brain than a seizure, than an epileptic seizure. Well, I had had those under control. I could identify my triggers. I could usually self-soothe and prevent them from overtaking me. But after this wreck, I was having several in a day at times. It was extremely difficult to work. I had brain fog. I had hit my head. And the lack of sleep compounding just made it very difficult. And these new doctors that I had to allow to touch my body was very triggering. These are strange men that I didn't choose. I hadn't interviewed them. I hadn't signed up for them to care for me. And they were great people, but it just was difficult for me to overcome that lack of choice in the matter. It was a huge challenge, and I'm still healing today. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I've arrived or that everything is back to normal, but I have been rediscovering my healing. I'm committed to regular meetings with my mental health care professional. I journal, I read all I can. I'm a lifelong learner. I practice grounding. I've been walking barefoot a lot. I do box breathing. I use essential oils, and I like to listen to certain music that's soothing and energizing. We have a saltwater hot tub, and the hydrotherapy has really been a major key to my healing. Not only is it good for my body and the aches and pains and the bruises, but I don't even turn the jets on most of the time. Just being in the warm water and feeling that weightlessness is very therapeutic for me. Our doctor gave us a red light therapy machine that we brought home, and my husband can carry it in a briefcase, so we take it when we travel as well. And that red light has helped to stimulate stem cell regeneration and brain health. I found a trusted reflexologist to help me with my foot injury, and we've become dear friends. I have an incredible massage therapist who, the same, she's also become a sweet friend, and I look forward to my meetings with these ladies. I take high quality vitamins and supplements that my team, my doctors have put together a regimen after doing some blood work, and I try to be really intentional about my work. I'm back to work now. This presentation is a part of my healing, and I want to thank you, not only the Humans for Humans team, but thank you to each and every one of you who is here as a part of my healing journey. I'm able to work on my own terms, and I'm so grateful for your support. And I have some tips for the mental health care providers who are here with us today who might be working with survivors of human trafficking. And like I said, I'm not a brain scientist. I'm just a survivor who has been working towards healing and freedom for over 20 years. So these are some of the things that have helped me, and it might help some of the clients that you work with as well. Make sure that you keep that power of choice central. That's going to help you to build trust with the survivors you work with, and it's going to empower them. Use creative strategies for healing. I remember one time my current mental health care provider, the psychologist that I see on a regular basis, was we were trying to work through EMDR. And I believe that stands for eye movement rapid desensitization. And I had a PNES seizure during that session. And she said, let's go for a walk. So we got up and left her office and we walked around the building. We walked around the building 7 times, actually, in the sunshine, and I got some exercise. My breathing was able to regulate. So her creativity really helped to bring healing in that session, even though it might have looked like a failure because it ended early from the panic attack. There was still healing that happened. Encourage healthy lifestyles with the survivors that you work with. Sometimes it's not just drug addiction or alcoholism or overcoming domestic violence. Sometimes we just didn't have a good lesson in nutrition and exercise, and making those healthy lifestyle choices to care for our bodies, our minds, and our souls can be pivotal for our healing. I encourage you also to provide a supportive environment for survivors like me to practice setting boundaries. I remember when I had to see these doctors that I wasn't familiar with, my psychologist allowed me to practice what I was going to say, to establish those boundaries, and it was very empowering to say those words in her office, and then I felt more confident to say them in the situation. And stimulate lifelong learning. I encourage you to read some of these books and maybe even share them with the people who you're caring for. The book, The Deepest Well, you'll learn a lot about the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale, in that book. And Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is just brilliant and beautiful, and I encourage you to read her work. Another survivor and an incredible friend, Danielle Freitag, is an LADC. That means licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And she's written 2 volumes of The Garden Keys. You'll want to get the set, volume 1 and volume 2. And she has journal prompts and a lot of encouragement at the end of every chapter in her books. They're great for survivors. And then The Garden Within by Dr. Anita Phillips. I think I've read it 3 times so far since it came out earlier this year. I love that book, and the imagery and the wisdom that Dr. Phillips shares is absolutely revolutionary. I've also written 3 books. You can get my books at footprintpub.com. I've pulled them out of print, so the only way you can get them is on ebook as a trilogy. So if you're interested in reading more of my story, these are allegorical, so they're not necessarily told like a traditional memoir. There's character development and plot development, and I take you through the journey of Navi, the main character. You can get those at footprintpub.com. And I want to invite everybody to sign up for more information on my website at authorSandyStorm.com. You can join my email list. You can find more info on my books and my speaking engagements there. And I would love to get to know each of you more. So please go to authorSandyStorm.com. Find me on social media at authorSandyStorm. And I really look forward to hearing more from you and seeing you in the future. Thank you for being a part of my healing today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you about the story of overcoming and how I got not only from the darkness of human trafficking, from being victimized as a child, from being abused and the pain that I went through, finding a pathway of healing and excelling to the highest levels that I could have ever dreamed of. And then once again being crushed and beaten down, but I am not destroyed. I am here with you today to share hope. Thank you for being part of my story of hope and healing. God bless you wherever you are in the world. And thank you for being here. I know we have some questions, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can read your questions and look forward to connecting with you all soon.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Everyone is so inspired. And when you have time, please go check the chat, as people were sending so many beautiful messages. We have here a question that is, what support systems were most helpful to you during your recovery? And in your perspective, how can communities better support survivors in their reintegration process? So 2 questions. I can ask one at a time.
Okay, those are great questions. So what helped me the most in my healing journey from the wreck or from surviving trafficking? I will tell you an answer for each. What helped me most in my healing journey as far as surviving trafficking, I believe that would be my husband. He is my rock. He's my safe person. He's my very best friend. We were friends for 5 years before we got married, and we have a very healthy relationship, but it has not been without struggles. We've read a lot of books on marriage. We've been through some marriage counseling, and we have good friends who hold us accountable and who encourage us to continue in the commitment that we've made to stay together. So he is definitely a huge part of my healing journey. And as far as the most important part of the healing from the wreck, it's been difficult to trust the professionals, the physicians, the new team of physicians that I've been working with as a result of this wreck. It's been a challenge to build the trust, but I'm grateful that I made myself vulnerable so that they could speak into my life and they could help me not only to heal physically, but to encourage that lifelong journey of healing. I'm a special case for them. They might work often with survivors of PTSD, victims of PTSD from combat or from a rape or from a car wreck, but the complex PTSD from trafficking is a unique situation for most of the people I'm working with. They have been flexible, very gracious, as have I, and I think it's leading to good results. Now, what was the other part of the question?
Thank you. The other part of the question was, in your perspective, how can communities better support survivors in the reintegration process?
I think that it's important for communities to realize that survivors are all around you. Most survivors do not self-identify. So you could be standing next to a survivor of trafficking in a grocery store or at the gas station or while you're dropping your kids off for school. So I think just being aware that we are in your communities, that's a good starting point. Make sure that the language that you use is informed. I will encourage that. Things like talking about child pornography, changing that language to be truly descriptive of what it is, child sexual abuse materials. I think that that's a very powerful way that a community can stand for justice and be a beacon of hope for survivors of trafficking.
Thank you so much, Sandy. If we have a few seconds for one last question, we have here an interesting question asking, how do you make healthy boundaries early on in a relationship as a survivor?
I really press into discernment to establish those healthy boundaries. It's difficult for somebody who was trafficked as a child because the very people I was supposed to trust were the ones who were victimizing me. And there's a lot of challenges with learning to trust new people. So I do use that filter I talked about. I take those thoughts captive and I ask for help filtering them. But I also rely on my mentor. I have a dear mentor, and I know she's part of this conference today. She's listening in from Texas, and she helps me. My husband helps me. I talk with my therapist often about new relationships. But I would just encourage having, like, using the safe people in your life as a filter. I've established a very healthy boundary with one of my former traffickers, and I've been about 4 or 5 years without any contact. It was very difficult because it was a complex situation. There were family members involved, but I have grown and found so much healing after establishing that healthy boundary, that I would just encourage, if you feel as a survivor like you need to set up a boundary, ask for help doing that, and ask for maybe some language from your therapist or your counselor to set that healthy boundary. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Yes, absolutely, it does. You inspired so many people. Please send messages on the chat so that Sandy can also read later on. And thank you so much for your presentation today. This was really inspiring, and we can never hope less from you. You are an absolute inspiration in all your work. And I hope you have a good journey with releasing the new book as well. Thank you so much.
Well, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.